Hello everyone and welcome to the Game of the Day presentation for round 4 of the 104th British Chess Championships currently taking place in Llandudno, North Wales. I'm Andrew Martin and today we're going to focus on the exciting game between John Merriman and Grandmaster Mark Hebden. When you're playing against Hebden, you know you are facing decades of experience. You know what he's going to play. Against e4 he plays e5, against d4 he plays the King's Indian, very occasionally the Benko Gambit. It's all very well to have this information, but to prepare something against his favourite lines is very difficult because he's got so much experience and has invested so much time into developing this repertoire that it's really difficult to play against Hebden at any time. Well, here Merriman decides to take him on in a King's Indian and plays the same-ish system with bishop to g5. Slightly unusual twist. White can go bishop e3 or knight ge2 there. Bishop g5 is just a slightly more aggressive placement of the bishop. And Hebden plays a6. This is pretty much an options preserving move. Normally black plays c5 here. a6 doesn't take away that possibility. Black can play with c5 or e5. He's waiting for white to clarify the position. And Merriman just plays a useful move here, queen to d2, just backing up the bishop. He's not yet committing himself to developing the bishop on f1 or the knight on g1. That can wait until black decides what he's going to do. And here Hebden decides to set up the burn system with c6. Now, probably the most popular move here for black. Obviously black can go knight c6, but one of the most aggressive moves is actually knight bd7. Normally against that in this system, white answers knight bd7 with knight to h3. The actual best square for this knight on g1 is probably f2. On f2 it reinforces the centre and makes it more difficult for black to attack the centre. But after that black can go c5, and if d5, b5. This is a nice aggressive approach, which I'm quite surprised Hebden didn't go in for, because it's currently giving good results for black and pretty much ensures black the initiative. One of the ideas is that if white takes that pawn, black's not going to recapture. He can, but he can also play queen to a5. And probably after that, white brings his knight back to f2, and it's game on. I tend to feel this is a reasonable Benko-like position for black, with the lines opening up soon on the queen side. But anyway, going back to the game, Hebden plays c6 and white plays bishop d3. Now basically black is encouraging white to play a4 in this position, which I don't actually think is a very good move, because black now has the excellent idea a5, which fixes the b4 square, and this is a concession which white doesn't really want to make. White probably has to get the bishop out, and now black just gets a pretty good game by going e5 and then knight to a6. I quite like this for black. Already he's covering key squares on the queen side with his knight, and so white really has gone into action a bit too soon by playing a4. So Merriman plays bishop d3, which is a good move. Hebden brings his knight out. White continues with development, and now the first strike in the centre with e5, whereupon white pushes by. Don't think there's any real merit in leaving the pawn on d4. You should push by and gain a bit of space. And now Hebden plays c takes d5, which surprisingly, according to my chess base archives, and they're pretty substantial, is a new move in this position. Well, in actual fact, this is quite a rare situation already. There was a very old game of Boris Spassky where black actually went knight c5. Possibly Hebden didn't do that because he feels it's a little bit too early to put the knight on c5. For instance, after bishop c2, if black plays a5 here, or has to play a5, then he's wasted time with playing a6 already. So Hebden takes on d5, new move. Merriman recaptures with the c-pawn. Black advances on the queen side with b5, and white castles. And only now does black play his knight up to c5. So black has played this opening in a pretty nice way and should have equal chances. It's worth noting that Hebden was playing this very quickly, so it's possible that we may have been in his preparation, albeit that this is a virtually new position according to the databases. Although the white's bishop on d3 is not that great at the moment, I don't think he wants to let black take it, because if you give black two bishops in a position of this type, they tend to increase in potential as the game progresses. So that's why white drops his bishop back, and now Hebden expands on the queen side with a5. Noting that knight takes b5 now is answered by queen to b6. It's actually a bit weird. If you run this through the machines, they suggest that actually white can get away with this. Can get away with moves like a4 here or something like that. But it's not a decision that a human being takes lightly, because you simply see the knight's attacked and black's threatening discovered checks, and you switch off at that point and decide not to play it. So it's quite understandable, going back to the game, that Merriman doesn't take that pawn and instead plays a3. But this allows black to freeze the queenside pawns by playing a4. Looks very committal, but it's probably necessary with white threatening b4 himself. I mean, I'm not sure that black would want to allow that move. For instance, if he goes bishop d7, I think b4 is simply good for white. Well, good, I say it's going to be a complicated position. But white has achieved something when he plays b4. And likewise, if black plays a move like queen to b6, which is also plausible, white will probably just retreat his bishop to e3, reinforcing the idea of b4. And black's probably got to go a4 anyway in this position. So that would lead to similar play to the game. So black plays a4. Well, we thought in the commentary room that would encourage white to kind of manoeuvre a knight to b4 and then maybe into c6. It's not easy to do. Merriman plays knight c1. Black plays bishop d7, protecting his pawn. And now the knight comes up to d3. Essentially, this is a very complicated middle game. Lots going on, and maybe white could have taken a little time out here with king h1, something like that. That's a pretty decent safety move in this position. Perhaps white is slightly better. It's difficult to tell. Black's got trumps of his own. So knight to d3 was played. We can't blame him for that. And now black played queen to b6. Well, the only drawback with that is that, of course, white can put now the knight on c5 in a pin. And it's just a question of how strong that pin is. Again, dropping back. Black could have also considered a move like rook c8. That seems reasonable as well. But queen to b6, bishop e3, and now knight to h5. Another typical King's Indian idea, with definite ideas of f5. And maybe even knight to f4 at the right moment. As we'll see, there are certain positions when black can actually play this move, despite the fact that white is covering that square with a lot of pieces. And Merriman played knight to e2. He was kind enough to come in and demonstrate the game in the commentary room afterwards, and he admitted candidly that he was finding it difficult to make good moves here, to find a clear plan. And it's true, the pawn on the pin on the knight at c5 looks quite strong, but white's got to find ways of increasing the pressure. So knight to e2, and black plays the natural rook a c8. Now, unlikely as it may seem, this might be the first position where black can actually put his knight into f4. It's a surprising move because white's covering f4 with lots of different pieces. But the idea is that if white takes the knight, the long diagonal opens up, and b2 could become weak. Let's see a couple of lines. First of all, what happens if white takes with the knight on d3? Well, black recaptures. Now, immediately you see that b2 is attacked, so bishop d4. And now I think black can play bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, and the surprising g5. White parks his king in the corner, and now queen to d8. Don't think there's any real way for white to get at the slightly open black king, and black's got good control of the dark squares. Going back to knight f4, could white conceivably take with the E knight? Black recaptures. Bishop to F2. And now queen to A5, another surprising move suggested by the machine. This looks unplayable because white can exchange queens and then take on C5. But again, his pieces come to clumsy positions if he plays this way. And after rook C8, bishop B4 only move, rook A8. White finds himself with 2 units under attack. And more importantly, this bishop on G7 is coming into the game. Now, okay, I can quite accept, going back to the game, that knight F4 is a difficult move to play, very committal. And so Hebden decides, well, I'm the stronger player here. I'm just going to play you. I'm not going to initiate tactics unless I have to. So rook AC8, rook AC1, and now black hits out with F5. Very thematic, typical King's Indian move. Again, this might be a position where actually black can play knight F4 again. It's a bit of a surprise, this move, at every stage. White takes it. Black recaptures. White's got to play bishop D4 there. And now bishop E5 is the main idea. And quite tricky for white to get anything against this move. If he takes on F4, then we can take on E4. That's the point. It's a nice tactical idea, opening up tactics against the loose white queen. Let's see this one more time. Knight F4, knight D, E, F4, bishop D4, bishop E5. If white plays king H1, trying to take away the tactics, then black can go F6. And after knight takes F4, again we have this splendid move, knight to B3. And white can get into a tangle here, as black is becoming very, very active. If he takes on B3, we take on D4. This is not a position that white wants to go into, because once again he finds himself in a mess. So a slightly surprising turn of events there, where knight F4 could have been played. Instead, Mark played F5. And Merriman took on C5 and played bishop D3, hoping to make something of this pin. That's why Hebden gets out of it as quickly as possible. Well, basically, black is okay here. We've got a very complicated position on our hands. You know, white's got this strong passed pawn in the middle, which is blockaded. Eventually, I think black would like to get this knight to D6, but at the moment the queen's a bit of a clumsy blockader. On the other hand, there's no way for white to up the pressure on C5, and black's going to play C4 quite quickly. Well, white came out with a mistake. G3. And black played F4, which I think is very strong. G takes F4. Well, the problem is for white, and I don't know whether Merriman overlooked this, that after bishop F2, C4, excellent move, bishop B1, black can take on G3. And suddenly, he's attacking F3. It's a simple oversight, but it's a type of oversight which is quite understandable. It's perhaps so simple that white overlooks it. And I don't think white can recover here by playing bishop takes G3, because that's a huge concession. Black would be delighted to take the bishop off and play bishop H3, rook F2, queen B6, and suddenly we see that actually giving up the dark square bishop is a very big deal for white, because he's ending up in a bit of a mess here. Well, I think black would win this one. So it suddenly gets difficult with white taking on F4, feeling that he has to, retreating the bishop, and now black playing this very good move C4, followed by bishop H3. And I think here black is really on top. So knight to D4, giving the exchange, as he has to, and now I think Hebden misses the best move. He takes on F1 straight away. It's slightly surprising that that is not the best move, but I think queen to E5 would be very strong here. And it's a bit surprising that Mark missed that move, because he's so good at prosecuting an initiative. Well, that's just very strong. Black's threatening queen to G5. He's also thinking about action on the long diagonal. It's awkward for white to find a move. I mean, let's not forget, black is still threatening to take on F1. So if he goes, for instance, knight E6, then I think just queen takes b2, and it's all falling apart, completely falling apart for white. Takes, rook c2, take on a3, take on f8, take on f1. This is gone. Another nice point of queen e5 is that after king h1, black can play the splendid move knight g3 check. And that's maybe the move that Mark Hebden underestimated or missed. Takes, the black attack is piling in, and I don't think white can defend himself. So that would have really justified all of black's previous play, queen to e5. He takes on f1, and now suddenly, and much to perhaps black's surprise, white works up some serious counter chances by plonking that knight on e6 and taking the bishop off on g7. And despite the check on h3, white plays king g1. Now it's a completely different ball game with black having to defend himself against dark square pressure and the advance of the central pawns. I mean, again, just dropping back, it may be that knight takes g7 is a slightly better move than king takes g7 because the black king is not so exposed. But of course, the white knight's gone back to a lousy square. So again, we would get some sort of sequence like this, which is unclear. The computer prefers this for black to the game. Well, that's understandable seeing what happens in the game, because suddenly white works up these chances with the move e5, and as you can see, this is now becoming practically quite a difficult position for black to defend. Hebden hits the pawn on d5, white advances the pawn, and now the confusing move knight to g3. I think by this stage, you know, black is experiencing a sense of genuine surprise as to what has actually happened in this position, and he's trying to confuse Merriman with this this knight thrust. Well, there's no way that white would take that knight, so he's got to find a better move, rook to e1, and now one of the points is to reintroduce the knight into play via f5. But again, this might not be the best move. The computers are suggesting that g5 is a better move, and one of the ideas of that is to bring the rook into the attack via e6, and then you can swing across to h6. Again, this would result in a simply unclear position. Well, back to the game. Knight f5. As you can see, this is not a position which is at all easy to play, and especially if you're getting short of time. But now Merriman starts to play incredibly strong moves. The computer #1 suggestion all the way along the line, virtually to the end of the game. And so he obviously was inspired by what had gone on. You know, he's ridden his luck in this game. He's got to the position where he can put Hebden on the defensive, and now he starts to play really good moves. Bishop c6 is excellent. He takes the pawn, knight to g5, and now the bishop returns to c6, rejecting queen takes c4 check. The best move according to the machines. King to g7, and now another very strong move by white, bishop b6, again rejecting discovered checks. I suppose then after e6 check, white's pawns would be very loose. Bishop b6, excellent, and now Mark runs his king to h6, again hoping to confuse white in the tactics, but Merriman is now really on song. He plays bishop takes d8, rook takes d8, and now another really strong move, king h1, just taking away all of black's tactics. And I think after that, we can say that black is lost. I mean, I suppose we can split hairs and say that white could have also taken on c4. Black takes on f3, well, takes, queen e4. This should also consolidate. But, you know, when you've got a great player like Hebden on the ropes, tend to get a bit nervous, so you want to play it as safe as possible, hence king to h1. Well, black now brings his rook in. d7, not so surprising. Rook comes into b3, and now queen to d2. Again, playing it safe, trying to find the safest way to win the game. Turns out that actually white can take the rook and queen the pawn. Don't think black's got anything here. If he takes on f3, the point is that, yes, black can get a couple of checks in, but after king f2, the queen on d8 covers h4. So there's nothing for black to do now. But queen d2, that wins as well. Rook comes into d3. Queen takes f4. And with black's tricks at an end, Mark Ebden resigned. So Merriman, he's having a great tournament. He's beaten Simon Williams and Mark Ebden in successive rounds. Congratulations to him. And I think you'll agree that was an entertaining and very interesting game.